Family, friends, and subscribers, welcome back. I hope you're enjoying The Conquest of Poverty by Helen Wilmans. In the intro of this two-part series, I asked a question, and I'll ask again for those that found me at this video. Hopefully you will take a few minutes and leave a comment. I am Daisy, your hostess. To paraphrase my question, how does anyone begin to etch at the embedded human psyche of the collective consciousness to help remove the idea that poverty is not part of the human condition? Clearly, I have yet to come across a person who will say there is no such thing as poverty. Hence, by form of deduction, since there are so many people that will either attest that poverty has been a personal experience to them or of having witnessed the poverty of others, clearly poverty exists, ergo it exists in the collective consciousness. Yet I ask one question and more come up. Who benefits if poverty exists in the world? I shared in the intro of this book series that historically, dating back to the early 1600 BC, in the Epic of Atrahasis, an audiobook which you can find here on my channel, we are told of a poverty-stricken people. Poverty specifically in the form of famine, drought, and agriculture failure, as a result of divine punishment because the chief god, Enlil, was trying to curtail the ever-growing human population which had become too noisy and restless. And here I go with the questions again. If there was a chief god, does that mean that there were other gods? And who were these other gods? Is this god or these gods of the flesh? Or did they ascend into power due to rules of the time, such as the governors of states? And was God used as a form of a title? Or were these otherworldly beings? Did they have the technology to control weather patterns, to create drought that could lead to agriculture failure by a mere command? And what drove the human race to be restless? Most important, is history repeating itself? It appears that aside from those ancient cuneiform tablets of early 1600 BC, and may I add, this may change in the future as new discoveries and advances in technology are made, we have no further documentation of what were the human conditions prior to that time. We can speculate, but without data, your guess is as good as mine. Scholars say that Earth is approximately 4.54 billion years old, which spans across four major eons: the Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, and the current Phanerozoic eon, meaning it has experienced just over 4 eons in its entirety. We are currently in the Phanerozoic eon, which began about 541 million years ago and covers the time of abundant visible life. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of time for things to rise and disintegrate. We have fragments of stories, and some would say that the fragments available may be just a fraction of what is allowed to be the visible to the general population as part of the narrative of humankind. And here your conclusion based on your experiences may agree or disagree with that statement. For the most part, many would agree with me, poverty does not look right. There's something wrong with that picture. And scholars will say that poverty existed before civilization, but it was defined by shared extreme subsistence level of living rather than by modern income inequality, mostly driven by the need for food, where eventually a small elite controlled most resources, leaving the majority to live at subsistence levels. The key influence factors included landlessness, taxation, conflict, and lack of opportunity. The story is as old as time. Yet nature, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, tells another story, a story that goes hand in hand with immutable laws, laws that if you look deep inside of you, become clear. Nature teaches that abundance is a regenerative and interconnected system based on enoughness, on cooperation, and diversity. It reveals that resources are shared and recycled through interdependent relationships. Nature does not lie, would you agree? So why believe in poverty? I believe that the mind of man, one by one, seeing the truth of this, can rise above it. I'm not saying that it's not a challenge, and obviously it will take time, but I believe it can happen. There could be a liberation, a collective liberation. What say you? Leave a comment. Let me know you were here. And with this, I turn the page. We continue now with the reading of The Conquest of Poverty by Helen Wilmans. Chapter 8. Difficulties. The difficulty that confronts me in making this book of great practical service to men and women in search for wealth is in the fact that they are expecting simply a set of business rules which, followed closely, will bring them what they desire. But there are no rules to formulate that can be operated successfully, and especially are there none for the man or woman who has no money to start business with. No amount of writing could make the thing practical in this direction. The only possible thing to do is to prove to the readers the great fact of the correlation of the forces within his own being as allied with the forces outside of himself. Then he cannot fail to see that as he strengthens his own forces, he gains greater command over the external forces until everything yields to him. A man could never lift so much as a chair if he believed he could not. We can believe with a belief that amounts to the knowing, and when we reach this point in belief, we are there, body and intellect, every bit of us. The brain can as easily speak a good word to the body as to speak an evil one, and the effect will follow. But men do not know this, and so they are at the mercy of thousands of idle thoughts generated by brains so low in the scale of development as to scarcely be capable of thought at all. It is this class of low, irresponsible thoughts that forms the mental atmosphere we breathe, and it keeps us weak in our opinions until we learn how to combat and drive it away, and how to place our new thoughts, now being educated in strength, in the place of them. The old thoughts have been saying all the past years, "You are a poor weakling. You are nothing of yourself. You were conceived in sin and born in iniquity. You are under the curse of your Creator, and what you are to do about it no one knows. The odds are so great against you that effort is scarcely worthwhile. You have only a few years here at best, and in the long run it is of very little consequence whether you obtain wealth and influence or not." But let us suppose that your vitality is so great that even your desperate condition ending as soon in the grave does not daunt you, and you simply must make an effort. Then the success of your effort on the old plane of thought will depend on what you think of yourself. If your fertile brain hatches business schemes by the dozen, all of them fine and grand and practical, and yet you fear to put them to the test, or if you put them to the test and do it with trembling indecision, then you fail. You might as well try to build a house out of loose sand and shape it into symmetry, as to build a splendid business scheme out of ideas that are shaken into incoherence by fears and anxieties. What would you do in such a case? You would find out some plan by which you could harden your material. You would make your sand into brick, or better still, into glass. Just as with yourself, when you see that you lack the firmness to carry out the enterprise you have conceived, you must harden and shape yourself. You do this by denials and affirmations. You summon your reasoning powers and examine your own capacity for the thing you are going to attempt. Then hold this great mental science fact before you, that if you desire a certain faculty for creating wealth, or inventing machinery, or writing books, or doing any other noble, legitimate thing, you already have the capacity to do it. The desire is the first faint suggestion of the fact that the ability is also there. The desire could not be there without the ability to execute it. You must know this, and you will know it if you reason on it. Let us suppose that God made you. If the gospel account of creation is correct, then God is great above all his creatures, and he must be good and just. But suppose he made you so that there were hopes that took root in your brain, all pointing to blissful realization, and yet there was no possibility of realization among them. What would this be but the promissory note of a ruined bank? What would it be but an outrageous swindle? Or suppose that God did not make you. Suppose that you are the result of evolution, the law of growth. Now, the law of growth is simply the law of unfoldment. It is the unrolling of an individual life from some bud in the universal life, which, the farther it unrolls, the more of the universal life it shows forth. Already enough of the universal life has been brought forth or manifested on the external plane to prove to us that there can never be an end to it, either in quantity or variety. So long as there is no end to our demand. Every desire we have is a demand upon this universal life energy, and there is nothing in all the world to prevent it from responding to our demands unless we ourselves close the door between us and it by our doubts, born of fear and anxiety. Therefore, putting aside the questions of special creation and evolution, it remains that man is in his own hands and that he has the power to build himself, after which he is master of his surroundings. One must think well of himself. He must love himself. He must take pride in every special faculty which he possesses. He need not make a fool of himself by trying to show off, but he must aggregate the strong points of his character and feel that he has the right to be proud of them. He must value his own opinion until he himself has dissected it and found it wanting. When he hears that another has formed a poor opinion of him, let him use his judgment in trying to discern whether that one's judgment is worth anything or not. If he concludes that it is, then he has a chance to make a correction in himself. This is character building, and it is one of the direct roads to wealth. One of the great difficulties in the way of people becoming what they want to become and doing what they want to do is the fact that they accept opinions of others concerning themselves. And almost the entire world misjudges others by putting too small a valuation on them. All of us are under the wet blanket of an indiscriminating public, and it is smothering out our lives. We must kick this thing off. I recall how I felt when I first began to heal the sick. It really was not considered respectable to heal the sick by any but the long-established methods, and I could hardly endure it. I had belonged to a most respectable family, and really took sides with them against myself when they thought of me as doing something of which I should be ashamed. I became more strongly individualized in time, and I did it by taking sides with my own intelligent convictions and giving family prejudices the cold shoulder. We are, all of us, apt to consider the opinions of other people when we are ready to do something different from what we have always been doing. This is a wrong thing, and is very injurious to character building. Perhaps it might be going too far and to say that we would do well to shut our eyes and ears against the world's opinions and put our best thought into operation, supremely indifferent as to what the world thinks. It is better to go to this extreme than to let the opinions of others tie up our energies. Had I yielded to the opinions of others at the time I came to know that through the power of thought I could cure disease, my usefulness to the world would have been lessened. I would have been less successful financially, and my selfhood would have been weakened rather than strengthened. Sometimes a person will be strong in some certain directions and hold his own against the very infernal pit, if necessary, in order to accomplish what he has in his mind. And at the same time, he may be very weak in another direction and permit the opinions of others to hold him as completely as if he were bound hand and foot. Here is a case in hand. Far out in one of the western states, a man lay dying of consumption. There was no question about his condition. He was actually dying. He came into possession of some of my mental science writings, which banished his belief in the power of disease, and he declared that he would leave his bed and come to me. So he arose. But the question of money faced him. He could raise only $5, and with this he started on a journey of more than 1,000 miles. How he managed, I do not know. Of course, he secured many a free ride on the cars, but he walked much of the way. When he reached here, he refused all assistance so far as charity was concerned and asked for work. This was found for him, and he recovered faster than ever. He was a young man of fair education and good natural ability. 1 year passed, then a second, then a third. His health had become perfect. He could work wherever other men worked, but always seemed unfitted for common occupations by reason of his own superiority. Why he did not start out as a teacher of the science that had saved his life and concerning which he had such perfect confidence was altogether unknown by even his most intimate friends. He has at times been almost as badly crippled financially as he used to be physically, and while he knows from actual experience that a knowledge of mental science can cure disease, he has never seemed able to apply it to the cure of poverty. Sometimes I think that he has not really desired to be rid of poverty. He did desire to be rid of disease, and he desired it with an intensity of thought that resulted in his willingness to walk more than 1,000 miles. But his desire for money, if he has it, has seemingly never been intense. This is one of the fundamental essentials to the acquisition of anything. An intense desire for any laudable acquisition is the prophecy of its sure fulfillment. Coupled with desire, let there be an implicit faith in self, and all will be well. Many a good thought is born only to die because the brain that gave it birth was afraid to express the thought in action. The man of whom I have just been writing is capable of becoming very wealthy. He will be sometime. I think he is now rapidly coming to the period in conscious growth when he will see that his belief in poverty is just as false as was his former belief in disease. He actually believes that there is not enough money made now to go around and make everybody comfortable, let alone making each opulent. He forgets as yet that the laws of growth and change are steadily at work and that the supply of the infinite is inexhaustible. The supply will always be equal to intelligent demand. The supply of money now in circulation and locked up in vaults is equal to the demand of all who come into an understanding of the laws of intelligent demand, and with the increase of those who understand these laws, the supply will increase. Conditions will always be met by the infinite. To say otherwise is an insult to the infinite spirit of creativeness. This young man has recently nearly doubled his previous weekly income by accepting a position of some responsibility, which was really attracted to him by reason of his development. The position seemed to seek him rather than he the position. The only danger of his failing in that position is his belief in the poverty of the people. His correspondence to them betrays his belief in their poverty, but he is mastering it. When he comes into the same positive plane in regard to this false belief of the race that he reached some time since in regard to disease, opulence will be his. He needs now to believe that he can become rich and that no one is so poor now that he cannot become rich. He needs to think out business enterprises, then dare to put them into execution. In the words of a successful man of business, genius is only energy intensified, and energy is intensified thought expressed in action. The mistakes he has made thus far are, first, his lack of real desire to better his financial condition. Second, his fear, lack of trust in self, and hesitancy in executing thought or expressing it in action, when he has awakened to the necessity of money as a factor of complete freedom and happiness. I have recounted this man's experience at much length because his life is a good example and fits many cases. Very many master mental science to the extent of curing disease, and this is a great conquest. But fail for a time to apply to poverty. I hope I have made plain the reasons for their failure. There's no need to postpone the working of the law after it is understood. Each should learn the law and then profit through his understanding by daring to put it into execution. To prepare for a life of opulence absolutely full of the power that draws wealth, I must stand by the person I am. I must uphold my me and never slacken one link of the good opinion I have formed of it. I must no more depreciate my ability than I would blaspheme God. Indeed, it is God I would be blaspheming if I should weakly depreciate self. There is no doubt but that I have had exceptional success so far as the making of money is concerned, and I know precisely how I came to have it. Up to the time when I had outgrown the belief that I was simply a crawling worm of the dust, I had no right to expect anything but the tramping on such creatures receive. As I threw this feeling off, I rose quite rapidly in my estimation of self. It was no fool's vanity that took possession of me, but a sense of justice and a feeling of strength. I not only rose in my own estimation, but I began to see all other people larger, and this added greatly to my happiness. As I grew happier, I grew freer, and I found that my old laughing disposition had returned, none the worse for 20 years' repose. But the great thing was that I had grown so bold that I did not hesitate to make a statement of my wants or to expect that they would be met and satisfied. To be sure, if I made the statement that I wanted a certain amount of money, and the amount was larger than I could reasonably expect, I would distrust the result and receive nothing. Then I would have to wait for days, even weeks sometimes, before my mind ripened to a point where I felt that I could command a certain amount. I had to reach the point of feeling absolutely, or rather of knowing absolutely, that there was nothing to hinder me from receiving it. As soon as I touched this point, the thing was accomplished. Now, there was never anything mystical about the performance. I never proposed that a purse having $5,000 in it should fall into my lap, nor anything else remarkable. I simply started with the assertion that my business would net me a certain amount, perhaps double as much as it had ever done before in a similar length of time. I would then think out a plan of action by which my income would increase and diligently set to work to execute it. My mind would then dwell upon it until I could see nothing preposterous or impossible in believing it would happen. And every hour, as I reverted to it and new thoughts were constantly born for prompt and courageous execution, it appeared more probable that I would get it, until at last I would know that I was going to get it and never failed. On the contrary, I always received a few dollars more than I had ordered. It is true that the desire and demand is accompanied by action, but all the so-called industry, in the same way of long hours of labor and great expenditure of effort that I could possibly have commanded, would never have yielded me one half the returns that these positive thought currents, expressed in judicious and courageous action, have yielded me. Much so-called energy or industry is only a waste of force and is really nothing but slavery. Suppose I had been like Aladdin with his wonderful lamp, and that I would have believed in its power to work wonders the same as he did, what would have been the result? As truly as I am sitting here this beautiful night, I cannot find it in my brain to limit the creative power of thought, with or without expression in action, when it shall become possible for it to be accompanied with that quality of faith which has ripened into absolute knowing. I believe that if I had the same feeling of knowing as regards the thing we call impossible, that I have concerning that which the brain accepts as possible, it would be done. In short, the inception of all further progress begins in the brain and goes forth to try its strength on one thing and another until at last it demonstrates some new fact. Thought is the beginning of all things, and thought is an actual substance generated by the brain. It goes forth as the pollen from the clover, and it proves itself to be the seed of new forms of life and truth. Chapter 9. The Vitality of Proper Belief. There is no denying the fact that next to disease, poverty is the curse of the race. Indeed, you may cure a man of disease, and if on being cured he finds himself bound hand and foot by poverty, you might as well have left him to die, for life is no comfort to him. The eternal load of poverty that men and women carry is almost too much for the race to bear up under, and this poverty is increasing yearly, not only in our country, but in every country under the sun. What is it, and why does it increase? I answer that it is an idea, a belief, founded in ignorance of the great fundamental truths of mental science. The first of these truths is that all substance is mind, that everything we see or feel or of which the five senses can conceive is a mental substance. In other words, that the entire universe is one mind, of which all objects, including man, are varied expressions. By saying that all is mind, I do not wish to convey the idea that mental science denies the evidence of the senses. The things we see all about us are by no means a delusion. However, it is a scientific fact, now generally accepted by all who have investigated, that the basic factors of the universe may be variously termed ether and motion, substance and force, or mind and thought. There is one universal substance, and the highest form of this substance is thought. To one who understands this, who comprehends the laws of growth and change throughout all nature, the statement that all substance is fundamentally mental is perfectly plain. As an example, take a tree. You may cut it down and burn it, but it is not destroyed. Its form is changed, but every atom contained in it as a tree still exists in smoke, gases, etc. The parts taken into the atmosphere may be breathed by man, and thus become a part of his tissue. The ashes nourish the soil nourishes vegetation, the vegetation is eaten by man. The very atoms which once composed the tree are now, in changed form, a part of man. That portion of the atoms of the vegetable which goes to nourish the body becomes brain tissue and goes to produce thought, the highest, most positive, and most powerful form of the universal substance. Any substance is capable of passing through this process and becoming thought. Therefore, everything is thought in an undeveloped state and capable of being evolved into thought. The great truth that all is mind can only be thoroughly understood by a study of mental science. A knowledge of it transposes all things, all life, from the basis of the dead, immovableness of physical matter, to the basis of living, thinking, active, ever-changing, ever-progressing mind, belief, thought, mental substance. It proves that all is mind, and therefore that man is just exactly what he thinks himself to be. Having proved this to the perfect satisfaction of every thinker who will take the time to investigate the subject, it will be seen that man is in his own hands, and the perfect master of his fate. If he is all mind, then he is what his beliefs are. Well, you say, but this does not change him. His beliefs are fixed, and therefore his condition is fixed. It is true that as we look at him today, all the great fundamental beliefs of his life are fixed. His belief in poverty is fixed. His belief in disease and death is fixed. But this is no reason why they should always remain fixed. He has other beliefs, outside of these great fixed beliefs, that are not in the same state of petrification. He changes his beliefs on many things according to the fresh ideas which come into his life. At one time, he believes himself fitted for a trade and studies the trade with the intention of following it for life. Perhaps the trade is no sooner acquired than he changes his beliefs and thinks himself fitted for the study of law or medicine. Who will deny that this change in the man's belief will work out a very great change in his life? It will bring him into relation with entirely different people than this first belief would have done. It will give him environments of a different character and will work changes in him and for him, in his surroundings and in his appearance, that will not end with him, but will show in results upon his children and grandchildren. So much for the external changes resulting from changes in comparatively unimportant beliefs. But think how much greater will be the external changes that will result from a change in the great fixed beliefs in poverty, disease, old age, and death. Remember that man is all mind, that as he thinks or believes, so he is. This being the fact, he has the power to think or believe himself out of the old, fixed beliefs and now enslave him so completely. But how? Can one believe anything he pleases? Can he believe a thing to be true simply because he wishes it to be true? Certainly not. His belief must depend upon his conviction. He must perceive, intellectually or mentally, that a thing is true before he can believe it. And I'm not going to deny the fact that this means anything less than a new education for him. An education that lifts him out of his beliefs in physical matter to a belief in mind and the constantly unfolding power of mind. An education that shows him how, being all mind, a knowledge of more truth is what he must have in order to gain the power which will show him his own mastery. This knowledge will not come to men so long as they are satisfied with what they now know, and the majority of men care nothing about knowing more. They want more money and more strength, but they do not know that a knowledge of themselves and of their relation to the law is the only thing that will give them permanent health, strength, and riches, and that it will do this by simply showing them in a clear, logical way that their old, fossilized beliefs are errors, thereby converting them from error to truth, changing them all over, and proving to them their own power. They do not know that mind alone is creative, and that being all mind, it is in their power, through an increase in knowledge, to reach a point where they recognize themselves as creators of themselves and their conditions. And I make a plain, unvarnished statement of truth when I say that no man can know this except through the study of mind and the law of attraction that infuses it. He must understand mental science before he comes into the place of intellectual creativeness where he speaks the word that changes himself and his surroundings. He can only come into this high place of power by intelligent conviction. He cannot jump into it ignorantly. He reaches it by the knowing. I came into this place by much thought and introspection, also by studying the law of growth as revealed to me in the habits of plants and trees and animals. I did not study books, for no book contained what I wanted. I wanted a knowledge of the law of attraction, which is the law of growth. Gradually, as I grew in the knowledge of the law, I seemed to be able to cooperate with the law and to begin to share its life, giving power and its opulence. The law is absolutely infinite in opulence, and this opulence becomes a personal endowment to the man who strives to understand it, who learns to perceive it or to see it intellectually. In proportion as he learns to see the opulence of the law, his intellectual perception of poverty ceases. He wonders where the poverty is that formerly riveted all his beliefs to itself, and then he knows that poverty is seeing from a narrow and limited perception of the universal opulence, and that wealth is the result of a more enlarged intellectual perception. And this knowledge is a thing that cannot be picked up in a minute. It must be studied. As I said before, men do not want to study. Give us the results of study, they cry, but do the studying yourself if it suits your taste. But they will have to study for themselves. One person can no more study for another person than one tree can grow for another tree. Riches are waiting upon your mental awakening. They correlate a rich mentality. They are free as air, and yet you are like the travelers dying of thirst by the roadside when the spring that would save them is within a stone's throw. As a man is purely a mental creature, so are his surroundings all mental states. And as tone resounds to tone, so do your surroundings repeat your mental conditions from far and near. It is deep calling onto deep all through the shoreless ocean of mind. The sound you send forth comes back to you, and no sound can possibly reach your ears save the one you send out. Your poverty is the protracted echo of your own belief. Learn the science of mind that will change your belief, and by changing it, change the whole world for you. Labor unions and protective associations may combine to the end of time, but they cannot change this great fundamental law. The working people may inaugurate a war that will exterminate the nation, but they will not exterminate this truth. For though the last men of the race lay dead, it will remain, eternal and unchangeable, waiting, in unshaken repose, the silent tread of a million ages, until in some new-fledged time, some new-fledged soul shall open his eyes to a perception of it, and a world be saved and redeemed thereby. As the race stands today, there is nothing the matter with it but its ignorance, an ignorance that shows forth in poverty and disease and death. Congressmen cannot legislate its ignorance away. Blood will not wipe it away. Dynamite will not explode it. Though the navies of the world be sunk, it will not be drowned. Only one thing will reach it. It has but one solvent on earth, and that is intelligence, a knowledge of the law of omnipresent good. And this knowledge will only come through an earnest study of the mind and the law that moves it. At one period of my life, I was interested in the labor movement. I often went to meetings of this class, and I kept the eyes and ears of my observation very widely open. The speakers were a complaining set, and they had a perfect right to complain. Their situation warranted it, only they should have complained of themselves instead of their employers, for they were just precisely in the situation where the development of their manhood placed them. They had put their own valuation on themselves, and they wanted to kick the lid off the universe because the men they acknowledged as bosses could not see them larger than they saw themselves. They were always talking about more wages and the rights of labor. Why, labor has no rights until it is free. So long as labor is owned, it is at the beck and call of its master, and its master can squeeze the lifeblood out of it if he so desires. The man who mentally claims the most gets the most. Why? Because he is more unlimited in his power to recognize the universal opulence. Of course, in the present stage of the world's knowledge, this recognition is on the unconscious plane. Jay Gould knew no more of this law than the man who worked for him on a salary of $10 per week. He was unconscious of the power by which he called to him the immense fortune he accumulated. But he had the power of seeing one of nature's grandest truths, namely that there is no limit to the supply that answers demands. His brain was so constructed that he could see nothing but abundance. He could not see poverty. He did not believe in poverty. He believed in opulence. Moreover, he had none of that sympathetic feeling by which he could enter into other people's beliefs in poverty, and therefore the appearance of poverty all about him did not shake his confidence. Opulence existed for him whether it existed for other men or not. This is what he recognized, and though his recognition was of the blind, unreasoning kind, like that of an animal, still it was recognition, and it brought him its own fruit. To recognize the same fact, that opulence does exist everywhere, and to recognize it on the conscience or reasoning plane of life, will put a man in possession of wealth. To recognize that life is a grand, vital principle permeating all things from atoms to men, and that it manifests in each object just in proportion as the object recognizes it, will enable all persons to conquer death and to cast their lives in such molds as their highest ideals may suggest. Opulence of health and wealth and life are absolutely unlimited. Man can limit them in his perceptions and take the consequences of doing so in a limited life, but the resources of the eternal fullness are not stinted thereby. Education is the only cure for poverty. The man may die before education comes to him, and he will die unless it does come, for he does not want education. He wants opulence without the education. He cares nothing for the heaven within, that a knowledge of these matters would yield. All he wants is the money and houses and land that he thinks would make him a heaven without. But the great bulk of men will never get it. Why? Because the spirit of a higher development is in the air, and this spirit has uttered its pronunciamiento, namely that seeing is being, and that he who will not see the truth cannot actualize it in his life and surroundings. As yet there is no true understanding of the law that renders opulence visible to the perceptions of the race. There is only an occasional perception of it in a few men, and this perception is not a thing they reason on or understand. It is an unconscious perception to which persons give no broad application, but limit it to themselves, and strengthen its effect in themselves by utterly ignoring all evidence of the poverty manifesting itself around them. He who heals a patient of disease must recognize that nothing in the shape of disease exists, that life and health are omnipresent, filling all space to the utter exclusion of disease. He must recognize that disease is simply a state of ignorance concerning the great truth that life and health are omnipresent. As all conditions are mental, disease is a mental condition in which the diseased person fails to perceive the truth. He is in error concerning the truth. A person can only recognize these great truths by an earnest study into the matter. But when he has once seen that they are true, and when he feels the force of their truth through his whole organism, he cannot help healing. His very presence heals. He disperses a thought influence from himself every moment he lives that is positive to the thought influences of those who believe in disease, and consequently disperses their thought influences, leaving his own positive ones in their place. This fact is no less true of that ignorant state of mind called poverty than of disease. There's no poverty. Men simply believe there is, and being mental creatures, what they believe shows forth in their persons and surroundings. Oh, if I could only give the people the faintest idea of the opulence that abounds, what would I not give? But they will not listen. They pinch the dimes with straining fingers, fearing to let go lest no more will come. And indeed, no more will come so long as they are ignorant of the fact that opulence is a part of the universal law of life. Why would I do with the poor man whose children are crying for bread? I would educate him in the knowledge of mental science, or the power of mind, if I could, but he will not be educated. He prefers to grumble at his boss, to call the advanced thinkers cranks, and hatch plots against the government that may deluge a continent in blood and will react with exterminating force upon himself. He is too ready to do anything except think. Thought on the high plane, thought from the basis of that greatest of truths, all is good, and therefore all is health, opulence, life, would save him. Rejecting this, there's nothing before him but the clash of a warfare with those of his own kind, a contest that cannot give him what he truly wants, for only knowledge of the truth can do this. Nevertheless, every experience teaches, and when men have passed through the crisis that now threatens, only to find that they are still poor, that even the external symbols of wealth amount to nothing except as they are representative of man's internal wealth, they will be ready for the education awaiting them in the great study of man's mentality and its relation to the law of life. Chapter 10. The Fear of Poverty. I have something to say on the above subject which I hope may be of value to my readers by way of a practical illustration of the truths for which I stand sponsor. What I'm going to say is the result of a correspondence with a dear friend whom I am treating for several diseases. She asked me to put my price down, and I did it, but I did it under great compunction. Why did I have any compunction in giving her a reduction in my terms for treatment? It will say it was because I wanted all the money I could obtain. But you would not touch the mark in this assertion, though it is a fact that I do want every cent for which I give a fair equivalent. It is a further fact that I love money, and the reason I love it is because money has another name, and that other name is freedom. In giving this friend a reduction in the price of treatments, I compromised a very great principle. In fact, I arrayed myself against it, and brought not only myself but her into negative relations with the great law of opulence that runs absolutely unchecked, except by man's ignorance, through the universe. I heal disease by refusing to recognize that disease is anything more than an ignorant life, arising from non-recognition of the fact that all is life, and that no individual opinion can possibly invalidate this fixed, unalterable, and uncompromising truth. For me to admit that the belief in disease has any fixed foundation in absolute reality would be to temporize with what I know to be false. And the result would be that every one of my patients who is strictly conjoined with me in thought in accordance with my instructions would become worse in less than an hour. My fear of disease, for any compromise with absolute truth is caused by fear, would communicate itself to them and show forth in a weakened condition of their bodies. Now, a part of this great law that all is life is the further fact that all is opulence, and that there is not one particle of poverty in the universe. A belief in poverty, like a belief in disease, is ignorance of the law of opulence. Poverty is as much a disease as disease itself. Both are beliefs which are utterly false, but which take effect in individuals who believe in them, for the simple reason that every person and thing is all mind, and as such is representative of what it believes. I heal because I do not believe in disease. I absolutely know that it is a false belief, and the patient who, following my instructions, becomes conjoined with my thought, realizes the truth in this matter as I realize it, and he shows forth health. He cannot help but to do so. He comes into my belief. I do not go into his belief, as would be the case if I sympathize with him and say, "Poor fellow, how he suffers." If I felt this, I would take on his condition, and instead of curing him, he would make me sick. But I hold firmly for the ubiquity of the health or life principle. I deny that there is any power in disease. I hold in unshaken strength to my highest convictions on this point. I will not compromise 1 inch by a recognition of his misconception of truth, and thus holding in the might of a high understanding of absolute law, I gradually lift him into its light, and his errors fall from him. Now, poverty is but one form of disease. It comes under the same head. It is ignorance of the law of opulence, which is part of the law of life, just the same as disease is. So when my friend and patient asked me to put down the price for her, I did it. But I felt that I was wronging her, and myself too. I felt that I was recognizing poverty as a power that could possibly injure her and me also, because we were, for the time being, one in thought. Having acceded to her request and reduced the price, I wrote a sort of protest in which I tried to explain that it was the wrong thing to do. But she did not understand my explanation, and it seemed to hurt her, so I wrote her again as follows. I am sorry my letter hurt you. I only wished you to know the law on the point, because it is generally unknown, and I have only learned something of it myself lately. My learning it has been the result of much thought on the subject and of long experience in healing people. In treating for disease, I do not recognize that there is any disease, and so that condition of thought called a disease disappears from the patient. In treating for poverty, I do it by not recognizing that there is any poverty, and I notice that the least disposition on my part to recognize poverty, or even the desire to curtail expenses, which in reality is a recognition that poverty is stronger than opulence, always has had a bad effect on the financial circumstances of the patient, and on my own financial circumstances as well. The fact is, believing as I do in absolute opulence, I have no excuse for not recognizing it. I do recognize it as an unfailing supply to every demand. Opulence of health, opulence of youth, opulence of strength, opulence of money, and opulence of houses and lands and all things desirable. And now, how can I hold true to my recognition of this supreme, never-failing opulence, and yet keep trimming my sails to meet some possible contingency arising from fear that this opulence will fail? The position is absolutely contradictory, and it produces confusion, inharmony, and loss of mental power. With this loss of mental power, every patient I have relapses from the high position to which my previous fidelity to absolute truth has held him. And now for a little illustration and proof of the facts I'm trying to make plain here. Although I had known, in a small way, everything I have said about the mistake of recognizing poverty, yet I had gone steadily on recognizing it in my actions by giving such reductions as I have spoken of, even while denying it in my thought. But after writing to my friend as I did, the whole thing opened up to my view in a wonderful way. I saw that I had wronged her and jeopardized her financial condition. I had been weak in making any concession to her fear of caution. I should positively have held to my fixed charges. This firmness on my part, based on a knowledge of the law of opulence, the law that proclaims every moment that the supply is equal to the demand, would have put in operation the occult forces lying back of the scene, and she would far more readily have obtained the higher price I charged her than the lower one to which I reduced it. I am just as sure of this as that I live, but I disobeyed my higher convictions, and the occult power lying back of the scene was not set in action, but instead it was rendered more obscure, and my friend's chances for wealth were positively injured. And now for the result, as it affected me. My receipts vary only a trifle week by week. But the week after this letter was written, they went down fully one half, and I am sure it was because I compromised with the widespread fear of poverty that exists in the world. But, you say, you have done the same thing before without taking the consequences in a falling off of your receipts. Why did you happen to take the consequences of this one particular delinquency so suddenly? To which I reply, nothing happens. It all came by law. I had not been fully conscious of the law until the writing of that letter revealed it to me. The moment I was fully alive to a knowledge of the law, its inexorable demand was upon me. I had to obey it, or take the consequences of willful disobedience. I disobeyed, and took the consequence. Again, you say, why, here you have been for many years arguing for man's perfect mastery over all conditions, and now you virtually give the thing away by making him subject to a fixed law. How is this? I answer, the law exists, has always existed. Man cannot change it. It is absolutely perfect in its action. Man is a creator, but after he has learned the law, he only creates in conformity with it. Previous to this understanding, the law, when he is on the unconscious plane of life, his creations are the most ephemeral beliefs. Previous to this understanding, the law, when he is on the unconscious plane of life, his creations are the most ephemeral beliefs. He creates disease and poverty, old age and death, and all manner of inharmony, the total result of which is chaos or hell, such as finds representation in present race conditions. But a knowledge of the law of life is absolutely essential to man's high and enduring creativeness. That which he creates after he comes into a knowledge of the law alone endures. These creations alone are infused with the saving power of the law. They alone are in consonance or harmony with it. That which is not in harmony with the law passes away. I do not deny a man's power to create while he is in ignorance of the law, but his creations are the representations of his ignorance. He is held by the law unconsciously to himself, and he recognizes a power to create without recognizing the perfection of that power. Therefore he creates by the best light his knowledge yields him. Disease, poverty, old age, and death are creations in ignorance of the full power of the law. Those who recognize a power in the law that utterly ignores disease, poverty, old age, and death come into a state of unity or oneness with the law, and they cease to be held by the race beliefs in disease, poverty, old age, and death. They are virtually resurrected from the dead. They have become creators of new conditions and are indeed the owners of the world. They have ceased to fear the race beliefs in evil, and because they are all mind, these race beliefs can never affect them again. But here is a continuation of my letter to this patient. If I reduce my price, I shall be recognizing the possibility that you may become poor, and this will do you harm. If you go into a store with the intention of buying a dress for $30 and begin in your mind to say, I can't afford to spend this money, I do not dare spend it, money is scarce and I must economize, you put yourself and your financial condition in the hands of that gaunt, bloodless, and merciless skeleton, poverty, and you will pay for it in loss. This is the law, and those who know it to be the law will take the consequences of disobeying it. But those who do not understand it are literally beneath the reach of the law, and its operation is not for them. They are in the bondage of fear, And until they learn positively that there is nothing on earth to fear, until they learn from irrefutable logic that they are masters of all conditions, the caution they exhibit is the proper thing. It belongs to the plane on which they live, and no amount of reckless daring will overcome the need of their conforming to it. Nothing but an understanding of the situation will overcome the necessity of their timing their sails to meet the condition in which they live. They are living in the element of fear because they have not learned the great fact that they are masters and creators of conditions, and therefore do not have to fear. And so long as they are living in this element, they are compelled to adapt their conduct to its requirement. It is only after they have ceased to live in this element, after they have risen above it by a course of reasoning proving them to be masters and creators, that they dare snap their fingers in the face of poverty and act as if they possess the whole world by spending money as lavishly as their desires prompt. Chapter 11. Courage. I believe that more than anything else, the race is lacking in courage. By courage, I do not mean that element which enables man to march to battle in unbroken ranks or to face a bayonet charge without blanching. I mean that reliance on self which proves the absence of fear both of what others may think or say and of inability from any cause to accomplish what is desired. Not one person in 10, no, not one in 100, either man or woman, does what he likes to do, even if he has the courage to do it. People are afraid of what their friends or the public society will say, and most of all are afraid of failure if they attempt anything other than that which, in some accidental way, they find themselves to be already engaged in doing. They lack faith in themselves. They have no true courage. The truly courageous man is afraid of nothing, and least of all is he afraid of himself. He believes in himself, and believing in himself, believes in the perfection of the law. He may not put this in words, may not say to himself, I believe in the law of opulence, but he nevertheless acts upon such belief. He says, I will succeed. He takes the law into partnership. He plans and he executes because he has courage. It may not even have occurred to such a man to think of himself as being courageous. His courage is so much a part of him that he does not give it a name separate from himself. He says, I will do so, and goes on, does it without once thinking there is any reason why he should not succeed, whereas a man of less courage would approach the purpose of his desire haltingly, wondering if possibly he was wise in undertaking it, and how he ever had the courage to undertake it. And the difference in the way in which each approached the object of his desires is often the difference between success and failure. The timid man is ever at a disadvantage both before his fellows and before the law through which success is attained. Confidence in self breeds confidence in others, and fear weakens both the brain that plans and the hand that executes. It has been said that all the world loves a lover. It is also true that all the world falls into step with the man who walks, careless of who follows, with the air of one who knows that he is master. The mass of people have no opinions of their own, except such as they have inherited or received from others. To such as they have, they cling tenaciously until someone arises whose strong individuality impresses them with a sense of his power. When lo, they drop their old beliefs to accept those of the one whose bearing proclaims him leader. Thus, to his strength is added that of the masses by whom he is surrounded, and a new set of ideas takes the place of the old. The new may be little nearer the truth than were the old, but of this the law of opulence takes no account. It has served him who had the courage to command it and to make a co-partnership with it for the attainment of his ends. Why should men be afraid of the opinions of other men? What harm can it do me that some or that all men and women fail to see as I see? Am I not I? And am I not sufficient unto myself? Why should the fact that others do not believe as I believe or think as I think distress me, or constrain me to believe with them? A skilled performer upon the piano or other stringed instrument will receive applause from the audience, But who ever heard of an audience applauding a music box? It is genius that commands respect, not mechanical execution unaccompanied by a personality. But even genius without courage is valueless to its possessor, for distrusting itself and makes no use of itself, fails to accept the tender of co-partnership made to it by the law, and so fails to accomplish its desires. The world is full of geniuses, of men and women who would be really great if only they were not afraid to be themselves. Parrot-like, they talk the language of their own babyhood and of that of the race, lacking the courage to speak the language of full-grown men and women. Like sheep following each other where their leader jumped over a bar, they jump regardless of the fact that the bar had been removed before they reached the place where it had been. Lacking the courage which would enable them to apply their own knowledge of powers of observation and reason, they make no demand upon the law of opulence, and for them, it has, therefore, no existence. Neither have they any personal existence before the law, and of that which they create the law's share goes not to them, but to the few who, recognizing the law, are recognized by it. If men dared to be their own selves, to think their own thoughts, and to accept the consequences of acting in accordance with their ambition, the world of society would scarce recognize itself in a week's time, and the present unjust system for the distribution of wealth would pass in a day, giving place to one infinitely better for everybody. There are very few men or women today who are contented with things as they are, or who do not believe a better condition attainable if only everybody would consent to make the change. But each is afraid of suggesting such a thing lest others disapprove, and so the juggernaut rolls on, crushing the life out of new victims with every turn of its monster wheels. Courage to exercise their opinions whenever opportunity occurs is all that is lacking to remove half the obstacles that obstruct the road to happiness for the race. And if these were removed, the other half would, as verily believe, remove themselves. Each soul must do its own thinking, and must be saved by its own power to, in consonance with the law, think itself from its present negative condition in life to that high and positive condition where it perceives its own creativeness and recognizes the fact that inherited beliefs do not save, but that the unrestrained power to create new thought or new ideals and to project them into the world of effects alone can build each distinct individuality as it desires to be built. Doubt is a giant who, with his club, pulverizes things and dissolves them to their original elements. But in all his dissolving, he has never dissolved faith. Faith is the soul of all life, that mighty but intangible growth principle still stretching unseen tentacles upward and taking hold of all that lies above the ordinary life plane. Not only taking hold of things above, but lifting up things below. It is the vine in human lives that climbs and climbs. Think how long Jack's wonderful beanstalk has been considered a fable. But it is the truth of all truths. It illustrates the faith of a world that grew and grew until someone brave enough to climb its dizzy heights went up and slew the giant doubt and redeemed the race forever from his paralyzing influence by making the impossible possible to every one of us. There is nothing that ever says no to a man but himself. When he hears the word no spoken in opposition to his will, if he does but listen carefully, he will find that it was but the non-recognition of the intellect that spoke it. In any and every enterprise, the royal will asks for nothing but the brain's consent. To know this is to pass at once from the minor to the major chords of life. The gradually approaching knowledge of its even now sending a stronger impulse through all the avenues of life. The people hear it and do not know what it is, but they are alert and listening. They are holding themselves in an attitude of intense expectancy. Something is coming. They are sure of it. They are ignorant of its character, and they will probably reject my suggestion that it is they themselves on the way from dead conditions to living ones, and that it is the rush of their own strong opinions that is filling the world with the strange, strong undercurrent of power whose swelling volume is momentarily increasing in strength. 12. Conclusion. When I look back and see the worthlessness of my life and aims before I studied mental science, I am filled with a burning desire that all persons leave their present narrow, hampering walks and come with me into the broad meadows and by the still waters of ever-present blessedness, where happiness is the breath of life, and where all cares and anxieties are forgotten, where all belief of evil and forebodings of fear are left behind, where only faith and hope remain to project the new cellular tissue of our ever-deepening and broadening personalities. For hope and faith do project the life cells into which flows the vitalizing principle, the God within, thus rendering us diseaseless incarnations of the great I Am. By resolutely and sternly denying the doubt that would cloud my belief in man, by turning away from a view of him in his present embodiment and holding trustingly and faithfully to my ideal picture of his glorious possibilities and of the more than human power vested in him, I have come to that point where faith and hope are easy to me. I now see a creature of infinite unfoldment, lacking nothing in all the world but the ability to appreciate himself. Not knowing the law of his being, not knowing his oneness with the one life, he depreciates himself. He takes the consequences of his depreciation in the bitter mistakes which he calls sins, and in those ignorant denials or negations of his high privileges called sickness and poverty. The truths I have offered to the public through my statements of the philosophy of mind or mental science are meant to teach man what a great creature he is. They're meant to remove at once and forever the crushing weight of a belief in his own helplessness and unworthiness, a belief that has been his bane and curse and defrauded him of his just dues in a universe that holds all for him. A belief that has shut off that infinite fountain of ever-flowing good which comes from an understanding of the fact that the supply is equal to the demand, and that a man may have what he wants if he will only learn how to take it. A belief that in limiting his own power, he has limited the power of the law in his thought. A belief that has damned, and is so today damning, more souls than all the other infidelities ever foisted on an unreasoning and unresisting race. They aren't meant to teach man his own power by proving to him his own greatness, by showing him how divine are the faculties of his being, by proving to him that the best opinion he ever had of himself is not half so good as the truth will warrant. While it has been impossible in the treatise of this question of poverty to any more than touch upon certain phases of mental science proper, I know that the right road is pointed out in this little book, and my hope is that through it many may find the way to liberty. Personal vanity is that inflated belief one entertains concerning himself before a knowledge of his real worth comes to him, and of course we repudiate it. But self-esteem, which rests on a basis of the knowledge of one's natural faculties, is another thing entirely. When a just appreciation of our own undying and ever-unfolding faculties is presented for our consideration, yes, and for our love and veneration, it ceases to be a personal matter and embraces every soul of the race in its broad and enthusiastic welcome of the potency which we see to be vested in all other men equally with ourselves. It is this broad and comprehensive understanding of the great natures we possess that shows us our power over error, poverty, and sickness, and points out the way by which we can conquer all undesirable conditions. Though I am even but a child in this wonderful knowledge of self, yet for some time past I have controlled circumstances to my liking, forbidden poverty admission to my doors, and refused to listen to the cry of disease, thereby banishing it far from my presence as a thing too weak and negative to keep step with my rapidly advancing pace in an understanding of the power of mind. The more I learn of man's inborn strength, of his own great power, the stronger and more irresistible I become. And the farther I am removed from the influences called fate, conditions, circumstances, poverty, and disease. Influences that were once my masters, but which will never be my masters again. I have felt my way along the broadening process of life, from the not knowing my own worth and power to the knowing it, by close and critical steps of thought, by challenging all ideas and refusing to accept any that would not stand the test of practical experiment. I have forged my way through 100 mistakes and met many a boulder that took all my strength to roll aside. And now it seems to me that no position is more thoroughly demonstrated by the works that result from it than mine. I do not intend to convey the idea that I have no more to learn, but only that I have at last found the principle that underlies all intelligent growth. I thank myself, the power embodied in me, that I have been enabled to stand champion for the race through a recognition of the power embodied in every man and woman living. It is a position that has already lifted many souls from under the influence of self-depreciation to that high plane of thought where fear has fallen from them, where sin, sickness, and poverty has ceased to be numbered among their belongings. Do you know what this mental science movement means? It means the closing of the old dispensation with its wretched beliefs in man's degeneracy and his inability to save himself, and the opening of the strong new era, wherein we see ourselves as our own saviors through the power of that mighty influx of truth now pouring in upon us, the truth that comes from the inner, the unseen side of life, and that is verily and truly being materialized in our external selves this very hour. The truth that enables us to put the highest, noblest, and grandest interpretation upon the writings of the spiritual leaders who have taught that as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, they also may be one in us. The truth which teaches the unity of all that each is indeed one with God, or good, the eternal principle of life. Intelligent understanding of this great process and how to cooperate with it so as to hasten its coming is the work we're trying to do. The work was begun in a small way, modestly and quietly, and yet it carries the conviction of self-conscious worth and could not consistently do otherwise. It teaches the student how to conquer disease in himself and others, and how to conquer all the hampering environments that cripple his life and make it so narrow and sordid and mean in his eyes. It gives him such an understanding of his own latent strength, intellectual and moral, that he feels the very foundations of his existence strengthened beneath him, while endless vistas of happy usefulness and noble prosperity open out before him. Self-crushing has been the method of every previous system of training, and the result shows in a dwarfed, debased, and diseased humanity. But now, at the beginning of the new era, there comes a change. Indeed, the very words new era or new order mean nothing else, and refer to nothing else but the reversal of public opinion on this very subject of self-esteem. Know thyself is one of the great commandments, no matter by whom it was written, or whether it is found in the Bible or out of it. It is one of the greatest commandments. The more truly a man knows himself, the more he respects and reveres himself. The more he knows himself, the more he knows the law. The more he reveres himself, the more he reveres the law. For law and man are one. They are the internal and external of the one omnipresent life. And to understand this fully is to make the atonement, the at-one-ment, between the life principle and man, by which man's life becomes identical with it, and he loses the very remembrance of sin, disease, and poverty, and begins to step forth into a wonderful comprehension and fellowship with the divine life, that of unbroken progression in constantly increasing phases of happiness and power. And this is what mental science is doing for the world. It is teaching man to know himself. In learning what he truly is, he cannot fail to learn that he has no fellowship with what we call sin, sickness, and poverty, and these negative conditions, which are but ignorant denials of absolute truth, fall from him like an old and worn-out garments. Everyone needs to learn all he possibly can on so great a subject. Never before has the truth risen in such a mighty tidal wave of power as it is now doing through the practical rendition of Christ's life and works in the magnificent system of new thought that is now not only proclaiming man's superiority to his environment, but demonstrating it to the easy comprehension of all. The numbers who are coming to a knowledge of mental science and its power to save are already great, The distant rumble of a mighty host advancing is already heard. Prejudice, fear, and false beliefs are being crushed under the feet of the advancing thousands. The darkness of ignorance is being dispelled by the light of reason, and the time will come when all mankind will rejoice in the knowledge of self, when each individual can step forth in his glorious selfhood and proclaim his own independence power. End of the reading of the book, The Conquest of Poverty, by Helen Wilmans. If you haven't done so yet, please do hit the like button, and if you know of anyone that needs to hear these empowering words and to remove the shackles of poverty, please share it with them. And welcome to my community. Subscribe to the channel.